You're listening to The Morgan Cunningham Show.
Morgan Cunningham's Less Hype, More Talk program.
Of course, there are some listeners out there, they hear the words spiritual warrior and exorcist, and oh my God, it's scary, and they freak out. But I'm telling you, there's really no need to freak out tonight. Our conversation is going to go in so many different directions. So if you're afraid that it's going to get perhaps too religious for you or too scary and demonic for you, I'm going to tell you that's not the case. So you don't have to worry about that. We have so many different things to talk about tonight. Me and Bill Bean, the Reverend Bill Bean, spiritual warrior. And I really became aware of this guy. Yeah, I've heard him on Coast to Coast AM, and he does interviews pretty much everywhere and anywhere. So I've heard him before. And I thought to myself at one point, wow, he's going to come on my talk show. I've got to invite him. But it wasn't until Maura Geist said to me, hey, you should get Bill Bean on the show. He's a friend of mine. And then I realized, oh, yeah, Bill Bean, and I had him written down in my notes, and so we reached out, and Maura Geist, she was on my program back in October, offered free medium readings on the Morgan Cunningham Show, talked a little bit about her book, God, the Soul, and the Afterlife Through the Eyes of a Medium. She's going to be coming on the show again in April 13th, I believe. That is a Monday night. We'll talk about why it's going to be a Monday night at another time. But it's a great Saturday night to be here with Bill Bean. Hi, Bill. How are you?
Great, Morgan. Thank you so much for having me on. It's really a pleasure to be on with you.
Absolutely. It's really a pleasure. And like I said, it is scary to some people. They hear the spiritual warrior, they hear exorcist, and they get nervous that this is going to be a really intense, dramatic conversation. I don't think it will be. Of course, there may be times, but you do so much more than just those two things.
Yes, I'm a man of many hats, that's for sure. And, you know, my calling does come from God. I didn't choose to do this work, Morgan. And we're going to get into this in a second. I mean, I was an experiencer. I was a victim. My family was destroyed by demonic forces, and I was nearly destroyed as well. So I fully understand why that had to happen in my life.
You have a number of books out there, and I think that you wrote in one of them that you were a victim as young as 4 or 5 years of age?
Yeah, that's correct. And, you know, looking back on it, I fully understand why it happened and why it had to happen. It was necessary. It was a necessary part of my journey to be where I'm at right now in helping others. So, you know, we cannot have a connection and a trust with someone, especially if someone has suffered, you know, really traumatic experiences. That's very difficult for them to share that with just anybody. So this is why God chooses the people who have been there, the people who have suffered. There were many times, Morgan, that I just wanted to die or just wanted to be taken out of this hellish existence that I was in as a child.
Wow.
And I understand it now. Do I wish that I could go back and change some things? Of course, especially when it comes to the suffering of my mother, who suffered more than any other person I've ever seen in my life. Mm. But I can't change that, so I just have to move forward now. So it's my calling from God and my obligation to God and responsibility to God as part of that calling to be this spiritual warrior for Him, to be a life coach. So it's not just going in there and the power of God working through me to deliver these people from evil. I also have to sit down and become a life coach, because when people suffer this level of trauma and they are overtaken by this garbage and oppressed and sometimes fully demonically possessed, that's going to require a mindset change. So after the deliverance takes place, that's where the life coach part comes into, where we have to sit down and put a game plan together for this person's life moving forward. You know, it's my job to get them out of the fear-based, trauma-based way of thinking and living into what I call warrior mode, which is faith, strength, and courage.
Bill Bean, the spiritual warrior, when you say you were a victim, when you say that you, your mother, your family went through suffering, just what was going on?
Yeah, there were many factors that were going on. You know, and I've written 6 books, and in the first book, which is called Dark Force, I say it all began in 1970 when my family and I moved into a 3-bedroom ranch-style home located in Glen Maryland, in a community called Herondale. But I found out that it actually goes much further back than that. I found out through a family member. It's so difficult and Morgan, I have very little family left. Both of my parents tragically were gone at a young age for me, and
sorry to hear that.
Family members as well. Thank you, and many other family members. And so I have very little family left. But family member, and it's so difficult for the remaining family members to even want to go back there in their minds. But one family member did share some things with me that it was my mom's brother and my uncle, and he shared that they had many paranormal supernatural experiences in their childhood. My mother was the oldest of 3, and they all had paranormal supernatural experiences. They lived a kind of hellish life in their childhood and teen years as well, and they suffered tragedy also with the passing of their father, who my grandfather Edmund Harvey, who I had never met. You know, he was tragically killed in 1957, struck by a boat that never stopped. So to this day, they don't know who it was that that struck him and ended his life there.
That's terrible.
Yeah, and so they had similar things going on in their childhoods, and it just carried over for my poor mom, and the others as well, but more severe for my mother. And so I feel, and then I learned that family members many, many, many years ago, as far back as maybe 100 years ago, actually had conjured up these demonic forces. And so they came upon the family and created this family bloodline curse, if you will, and created a variety of just some of the most bizarre and tragic things, these awful deaths and just many hardships and just some things that were above and beyond the usual struggles that families have over the years and generations. So after learning that, and I'm convinced that something like that in fact did take place, and if in fact it did, well then again it helps me to better understand why this was so severe. So I feel that my parents were led to this house where evil was already present and manifest in the home and in the area. So we were kind of in this perfect storm. And this is why it was so powerful and so severe. And furthermore, these things gain in power off of our fears and off of all of our confusion, and then it could turn into anger or rage or, things of that nature. These demonic forces gain in power and feed off of that, and that's how they become empowered to the point to where they can actually physically attack people.
And it makes me wonder, how long does there have to be, how long does this chain have to continue of terrible tragedies and events from happening, continuing to happen over and over and over again? Some people may say, okay, well, some person died in my family tragically. It was an accident. It was just bad luck. But if it keeps happening over and over again, and if you get led to what you said was a haunted house, how many times does this have to happen until someone says, you know what? There's something really, really wrong here. This isn't just luck.
Yeah, and in my cases now, Morgan, I've helped hundreds and hundreds of people all over America and 40 other countries as well. And you hear this reoccurring theme that people suffer like this and families suffer like this, and it continues until someone like me comes along. Now, I'm nothing special. I am a vessel that God works through. So I'm not extraordinary, but God does extraordinary things through me, and I thank him and praise him for that. So without God and without his power, I would be nothing, and I could not do this work. That said, when someone like me, by the power of God working through me, comes along, that's when it stops, because I will go to these families and by the power of God break all these family bloodline curses. And it's amazing. It would be... it's very hard to describe in words as far as you having a real understanding of how this would work, but I assure you, if you were with me in person, you would feel the power of God at work and how this stuff just goes. When I'm invoking the power of God over it, it absolutely goes. It has to go because it has to obey the will of God. So we'll get into that as we progress along. But, again, I could not be where I'm at now in doing the work that I do and in helping other people had I not been there to go through these horrific things. And I'll tell you, Morgan, I recall as a child, and I was 4 years old, when we moved into the house. My sister was 13, and we had a baby brother that was 1. And my first recollections were, and the house was located at the bottom of a downhill cul-de-sac, and a very large and deep ravine was located behind it. It stretched for several miles.
Yep.
And my first recollections were not good, that's for sure. My sister agreed with me on that. She felt the same way. It just had a very ominous look and feel about it. The house was semi-dilapidated. My father, William Bean Sr., was a master carpenter, so he was a contractor. He saw this as a restoration project, which he did quite a bit of work to it. My mother, Patricia Bean, was a homemaker. And she was a great mom and was a wonderful person who really had some horrific things happen to her over the years. And she was the first to have an experience in the house, and it had taken place not long after moving in. And my dad had taken us with him for the day over to our grandparents' house to allow her to unpack and organize without us being under her feet. And it was during the course of this that she felt a presence come into the room. She thought it was my dad sneaking in to play a joke on her. He had that type of sense of humor.
But it wasn't.
No, she was in the living room unpacking boxes and trying to organize things. And, she suddenly feels this presence. She spins around, fully anticipating on seeing him. And hopefully startling him first. And to her shock, no one was there. So, as you can imagine, she was unnerved by it, perplexed.
Startled, right.
Sure, startled, shaken, all those things. And then eventually able to go back and do what she was doing. And it wasn't long after that my sister's bedroom door slammed shut. And that was enough to make her go outside and wait until we returned. So that's where it began. And then it...
and it never let up.
No, it continued to escalate into these types of noises and feelings of presence, and then seeing apparitions, and then gradually escalating into violent physical attacks on us from these demonic entities. So it was a gradual progression that grew and grew and grew and created a variety of terrors and torments and absolute destruction of my family. Now, that said, I can't blame it all on these demonic forces. My father certainly had a hand in some things, and we'll get into that. But I forgive him for the things that he did and the bad choices that he made. But I will say this right now, I don't care who you are. When you make a bad choice and you continue in that, then the devil is going to be right there, and he will intensify that. So he will take that mistake and bad choice and amplify and magnify that to the point to where some really bad things start to happen. So we will get into some of the bad choices that he made. But I'll tell you, Morgan, I'll give you a quick layout of the house.
Please do.
If you were to enter in through the front door back then, you would come into the living room area. The first thing that you would see would be this coat closet, right there facing as you're entering in the door. It's right there. And then you enter into the living room. The house was always very dark, even on the brightest of days, and had this dark brown paneling, almost black in color. And so it was always very dark, and you could feel the demonic presence there. It was a very, very heavy feeling. Sometimes people feel that, they'll fear. So there are atmospheric changes when demons are present. Sometimes people's ears will ring or their sinuses will get stuffed up. There truly is. Sometimes they'll smell foul odors. There really is a distinct atmospheric change, and then sometimes, a really rotten smell that accompanies that. And so all those things were present at various times during living there. And so again, you're in the living room, very dark brown paneling on the walls. You would, if you went straight through, you would go straight through into a little dining room area in the back door, right off of the dining room. But to the right was a little galley-style kitchen, and the kitchen window would face that ravine, the backyard in the ravine. And my mother, oftentimes over the years, while doing dishes in the evening, would look out the window, and she would see these blue lights descending down into the ravine. So we had, not only this demonic garbage going on and all of this supernatural activity, but there was a UFO aspect tied in with this, along with these alien type of beings as well. So it's all connected anyway. In my fifth book, Stranger Than Fiction, I write about it, about how all of these things are connected, and they surely are. You just have to do a little research, and when you do, you'll be able to connect the dots. So you would come back out of there and then go in the middle part of the house. You would make a right and go down a long hallway, which had a hard tile floor. And oftentimes, I would be laying in bed, and you would hear these footsteps coming down the hallway, late at night when everyone's in bed. And it sounded like the person had, work boots or combat boots or something, hard-soled shoes. It would reverberate off of that paneling very, very loudly. Oh. And I wasn't the only one to hear it, and it happened over and over and over again. And I can recall, again, as a child, just being so terrified by some of these things and just having the covers pulled up over my head and just knowing something was there. So my brother and I shared the first room on the right. My parents had the next room down on the right, and then my sister's room was the last room on the left across the hallway. And that, I feel, was the main portal in the house. That room was always cold, even on the hottest of summer days. And that's also the room where the door would open and slam for many repetitions at a time.
So that was the busiest room. That was the hub of all of this activity.
Absolutely. So I feel that there were several portals in the home, but that was the main portal. And I feel that portal was in her closet. And it's interesting, Morgan, because at the end of the hallway was a linen closet. And I recall on one occasion, what I saw, and then another person saw it happen again in 1979. An entity would walk right through, into that linen closet, and so right through the doors of the linen closet. So I feel that portal, probably stretched from the linen closet at the end of the hallway into my sister's closet, and then out, out in her bedroom. Right. The backside, of course, faced the backyard, but then the other part of the room was facing the right side of the house. And it's interesting because in the beginning, not long after moving in, my dad had set up a pool there, an above-ground pool. And again, my father was very meticulous, and, he was expert in construction and doing things, so he was always going to do things right. Yeah. And he erected the pool, and everything was fine. They fill it up. It's filling up overnight. And the next morning, he and my mom get up, and they see this river of water, flooding the backyard. And they go, and something had caved that pool in. And again, it's very interesting because that pool was right outside of my sister's window there. And so it's interesting that if that was the main portal in the house, that pool was absolutely collapsed. And then, so my father's he was very upset, needless to say. So then he ends up putting it up in another part of the yard.
Bill Bean, he is our guest. I hate to do this. I'm going to get back to the story. We're up against a hard break. There's more of the Morgan Cunningham Show on the way.
You're listening to The Morgan Cunningham Show.
Morgan Cunningham's Less Hype, More Talk program.
As always, you're at morgantalks.com. There is a page for Reverend Bill Bean, the spiritual warrior, at my website, morgantalks.com. There you will be able to find a link that will take you directly to his website, where you'll be able to learn more about our guest, the Reverend Bill Bean, spiritual warrior. And just to recap from where we left off, he was growing up in a very difficult situation, a house that was possessed, a family with a lineage of many struggles, really just so many people victimized in one bloodline. Absolutely incredible how he was able to overcome this and be able to go about helping people, he claims. And he was telling us a tale about how his sister's room was more or less the main portal for all of the activity in his childhood home. There was a pool not too far outside the window that one night burst, and as I understand it, Bill was about to tell us his father's reaction to that. Welcome back, Bill.
Thank you, Morgan. Yeah, he was not pleased by it at all, that's for sure.
Of course.
He was enraged, and, all the work that he did, he had done putting it up and then the filling overnight, and to come out and find it
flooded
in that condition, he was not pleased. So he ended up taking it and moving it over, maybe 20 or 30 feet or so into the backyard and set it up there, and without incident, the pool stood there without incident after that. But I find it very interesting that if, in fact, what I say is true about the house being, that room being the main portal in the house, that, the pool was right there beside it and very much in that portal as far as I'm concerned. So it's just amazing how those types of things happen. My sister was the first to have a physical encounter, and that took place late in 1970. And she was in her bed asleep. Something woke her from her sleep. She couldn't see anyone or anything there, but she got frightened, and she was going to get up and get my parents. And as she attempted to get up, something grabbed her leg. And thank God for her that she was able to let out a scream, and that woke my parents, and they came running into the room. My dad turned the light on, and they didn't see anything there. However, there was a red mark where she said that something had grabbed her leg. And my sister was never again comfortable in the house. She wasn't there for very long. She would end up running away in the middle of the night in 1973 and married a young man in the neighborhood. As she stated, as you know, Morgan, my story was first featured on the A Haunting series, and it aired on September 7th, 2006.
Correct.
And they're still showing it to this day. It's one of the most watched and rebroadcast episodes in the history of that series. And I thank New Dominion Pictures and A Haunting and Discovery Channel for airing the story.
Absolutely, for getting that out to people.
Oh, yeah, that's what put me on the map. And, it got international exposure and attention. And I've been contacted by people from all over the world. And, we'll get into that a little more. But, without A Haunting, we wouldn't be having this interview right now, that's for sure. So
no.
My sister, again, ran away, got married. Now, in the A Haunting episode, they had some things that, and why they do these things, I don't understand, but, it was not true in the way that they depicted it. They depicted my parents giving her a send-off and all of this. It's not true. She ran away in the middle of the night. My parents were frantic. And so she was out of the house. As she stated in the interview that she would have married anyone just to get out of that house. She couldn't take it anymore. She felt like she was always being watched and followed.
So this wasn't like a case of, oh, my God, I love this man, and my parents won't let me marry him, and I'm going to leave and elope. This was, I have to get out of this house. I don't care what it is. I have to get out.
Absolutely. And so then I was the next to have an encounter and an attack. That took place in 1971. I was 5 years old, and like my sister, I'm asleep in bed, middle of the night. Everybody's in bed, and something wakes me from my sleep. just like her, I couldn't see anyone or anything there. Yet I know something's there, and I got frightened.
Any touch?
And I'm sorry, Morgan?
Any touch? Was there any physical contact?
Well, we're getting to that.
Okay, sounds good.
Started to get out of bed, and I was going to go and get my parents, and I got up on the left side of the bed to go and get them, and a tremendous force grabbed me by my shoulders and slammed me back onto the bed, pinning me to the bed. And I've given over 2,000 interviews in my career. And to this day, I can't describe in words the level of fear and terror that I was feeling at that time. The trauma was off the charts. I felt like I was going to die. My heart felt like it was jumping out of my body. I was absolutely panicked. I was pinned to the bed. I couldn't move anything. The only thing that seemed to move were my eyes. And a lot of horrible things happened to me during the course of what felt like hours. I'm sure it was only minutes. But it felt like hours. And horrible things were happening to me. And then suddenly, this apparition appears at the foot of my bed. And I have to believe, even looking back on it now, that this had to be some type of divine angel that God sent for protection, because as this angelic entity appeared, all the horrible things that were happening to me suddenly stopped. And this was a woman. She had just this... With her appearance, not only did everything stop, I felt so much love and peace and comfort from her. And perhaps God sent her there to not only end it, but to calm me down as well, because I'm telling you, my heart was literally, I felt like it was just literally going to jump out of my body. And the most amazing thing about this, Morgan, is that this divine angelic being looked exactly like my mother. So it wasn't my mother, because she ended up turning to her left and then just floating up through the ceiling. And that was the end of that. And then I got up, raced into my parents' room, and woke them up and told them what happened. And my dad didn't believe it. He thought I just had a bad dream.
Was there any evidence that this had happened to you? There was a red mark on your sister. Was there any of that on you?
No marks on me, but I got up the next day and felt like I had the flu. And I suffered these attacks many times throughout the years, and every time after it would happen, I would feel like I had the flu. I would have fever, sore throat, body aches, the whole deal like that, and I can't tell you how many times I was taken to the doctor over the years. And
I'm sure it messed up your immune system terribly.
Yeah. And they couldn't understand why I kept having these types of things happening over and over again, with the illness, but every time. And so perhaps it had something to do with the level of trauma and fear associated with the event. Maybe also by being physically handled in that way, maybe there was something on the entities that, of course, there's evil on them and in them, and maybe there's some way, and I do believe it now as a spiritual warrior for God, an exorcist, that illness does go hand in hand with a demonic presence, and that could be mental illness or a physical illness or both. So I do understand it now. I couldn't understand it then. But it's very interesting how that was a reoccurring thing for me throughout the course of my childhood. And I have to tell you, Morgan, I'm a big, strong guy, and I don't fear anyone or anything. God's the only one that I fear. But back then, as a child, if it were just my mom and I in the house and she had to use the bathroom, I would sit outside the bathroom door until she came out. I mean, that's how bad it was.
That bad.
And so it was that bad. And so, that happened to me in 1971. Then other family members, they also were experiencing things, including my dad. And again, my dad, I just told you a little about myself, he was the same way, a very rugged man, a man's man, not afraid of anyone or anything, was used to being in control of every situation. And he suddenly found himself in a situation that he couldn't control, and it really confounded him to the point to where not only was he seeing apparitions, but he too was physically attacked on one occasion and maybe more. But this is an individual, again, that was a very strong and rugged, tough guy.
And eventually these spirits were able to get through to him.
Yeah, and so this led him down a very, very bad road. And my parents were social drinkers. And back then, in the late 60s, into the 70s, the families had house parties and all that kind of stuff. And in Maryland, they would always involve crabs and shrimp and all those different things, seafood types of things. And so there were always these family gatherings in the beginning. So my parents were social drinkers, but as this activity had manifested and then continued to intensify.
This couldn't be good.
No, it led my father into a world of alcoholism to where, looking back on it now, I feel that he was literally trying to escape reality by just diving into, to that awful, horrible world. And
I read in one of your books, I believe it's Dark Force, correct me if I'm wrong, but he ended up leaving home, didn't he?
Yeah, and thank you for taking the time to read it. Yes, he did, and he left, and thank God he did leave, Morgan, because had he not left us, and he left us in 1975, had he not left, I'm convinced that he would have killed my mother. He was physically abusing her between the years of 1973 through 1975, and severely.
So it wasn't just a sister that left. That was kind of perhaps the peak of all of this bad activity. Then there was the abuse, and then there was the father leaving.
Yeah, and so, after he leaves, my mother started coming under regular physical attack from the entities, and my mother had cuts and bruises and scratches on her long after my dad had left. And it had got to the point to where these entities were coming to her late at night. They were physically assaulting her, choking her, grabbing her. Again, she had cuts, bruises, scratches on her long after my dad had left. One occasion, she was being choked by this entity, and so the event stops. She's panicked. She jumps out of bed. She needs water. She goes up the hallway into the kitchen because she wants a glass of water. And so she reaches the kitchen. She opens up the cabinet door, and an unseen force shot a glass out like a projectile at my mother, striking her above the brow in her head and knocking her unconscious. And she woke up in a pool of blood and had to be taken to the hospital. She suffered a concussion. She suffered greatly, Morgan, over the years, and she suffered those attacks up until the time of her untimely death at the age of 44.
And the fact it was untimely, I'm guessing that it's because of its the connections with the spirits, the demons.
No question about it. She died of a cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 44, 2 months and 2 days after my grandmother, her mother, Dora Harvey, had died from a sudden series of heart attacks. And these were the two closest people to me in my life, and they were suddenly gone in just over 2 months from each other.
How do you, Bill, move on from this? You went through so much just as a child, watching all of the people, your loved ones really, go through absolute living hell. How do you move on? How do you actually pick up the pieces and say, okay, this is my life, I'm taking control?
Well, I didn't want to move on, to be honest with you. After those things happened, I pretty much, I was so numb inside, and I had a support system from friends that I had at that time, and God bless them, they were there for me and they helped me a lot. But I was so numb inside, they had no understanding, and I wouldn't let anyone even get close to me to even try to understand the void and the situation. And I truly wanted to die. I was seeking death, Morgan, for a long time. I really was. I wasn't going to slit my wrist or take pills or anything like that.
But you wanted it to end.
I sure did. And, if not for the power of God, and through it all, I've been in many life-threatening situations in my life over the entire course of my life. And God has been there for me every time and delivered me and saved me every single time. And it really wasn't until I decided to make God first in my life that my life really changed to where I actually wanted to live and not just exist. But I can tell you, I recall days to where I would wake up and maybe get up and use the bathroom and come back and sit in a dark room pretty much until it was time to go back to bed and sit there in silence.
That's not good. That is not
and
good.
In so much pain that it was just unimaginable. And so, I suffered like that greatly for a long time. I could never let anybody get close to me. It was just an awful way to live.
If you're looking to bring God into your life thinking that that's going to be the solution, well, how do you actually do that? Did you go to a church? Did you call somebody? Because you didn't even want to leave your own bedroom.
Well, okay, so I'm going to back up a little bit. Here's how the seeds were planted for that. So
okay.
I'm going to back up a little bit to the year 1979, and at that point in time, we were still living in the house. We had left the house in December of 1980. So at that point in time, I'm 13 years old. We're living in the house. My mother is suffering greatly. She had a new man in her life by that period, and his name was Richard. And if not for his love for my mother, he would have been long gone. He was terrified. And he, like my dad, was a very powerful individual, man's man, rugged individual. Wasn't afraid of anyone or anything, former boxer. Yet was physically attacked many times while being in the house, and had those experiences with my mother as well, to where they were attacked together. And he was terrified to be in there, and he begged her for the longest time to come, for us to come and live with him. She wouldn't do it. So at this point in time, my father, who was living in Florida, so when he left us, he moved to Florida, and he went to work for his brother, Clifford Bean, who is a devout Christian, very, very good man. He's still with us. He's in his 80s. And so he'd gone down there to go to work for him in his construction company. So around the year 1970, so he left at 75, and then around the year 1979, he contacts and wants to see us and wants my mother to put us on a bus and so we can go down there to Florida to see him. Well, I very much hated my father, for the things that had happened.
Understandably, yeah.
Yeah, I hated him with a burning passion for many years. So thank God I was able to forgive him before his untimely death. But so I didn't want to go. But I ended up going because my younger brother loved my dad unconditionally. So I went, I guess, as an older brother to keep watch over him. So we go down there begrudgingly on my end. And we get there. And little did I know it would be one of the most important talks I've ever had in my entire life.
How so?
This took place between my Uncle Cliff and I. And again, my Uncle Cliff was and still is a devout Christian, very, very good man. And he was aware of the situation with the supernatural occurrences that were taking place. And we had a discussion that, I could take power and authority over this by the power of God in Jesus' name. Now, I did not know this. My parents believed in God, but we didn't have any faith-based upbringing. We had never attended church as children. We were never baptized.
Okay.
So we really didn't have it yet. Through that all, I had this blind faith. And certainly after that discussion with my uncle, that planted such good seeds with me of faith. And little did I know, Morgan, that right after returning from that trip, I would engage in my first battle against those demonic forces. And it took place on the very day that we returned in 1979. And my mother was having her sister and her boyfriend over. My grandmother was present with us, so it was my mother and Richard, my grandmother. They were waiting on my Aunt Joyce, my mother's sister, and her boyfriend to come over.
Bill, let me just say here, I'm going to pause you. This is the day that you returned because we're coming up on a hard break. We have more coming up next hour with the Reverend Bill Bean. Quickly, Bill, could you let everybody know how they can find you online?
Yes, www.billbean.net.
And that is linked up at my website, morgantalks.com. That's probably where you're listening to this program right now. As a matter of fact, I know that for a fact. You can't find this show anywhere else. morgantalks.com. I'm Morgan Cunningham, the alternative talker. And on this night where you're fearing coronavirus, don't worry, you're safe with me, MC.
You're listening to The Morgan Cunningham Show.
Morgan Cunningham's Less Hype, More Talk program.
I'm having great conversations with the Reverend Bill Bean tonight, spiritual warrior. He is really a great guy. During the breaks, of course, you guys don't hear it. You hear the commercials, the breaks, and some of the filler content. But I have conversations with my guests. I love them all. Bill is just another one of those great guys. Everybody on my program is great. So just a quick thank you to everybody who's been on my program. And remember, if you haven't been on the Morgan Cunningham Show, please certainly find me online, morgantalks.com. Click on contact. It's easy. There's a section that says be a guest. And if you click be a guest, it will send your message directly where it needs to be. And as long as it's somewhat related to what we talk about, which is alternative talk, if you want to come on and bash Trump or Hillary or any of them, you're not going to get on the show. But if you have something different to talk about, whether it's paranormal or perhaps a little spiritual, maybe a mix of the two, or something totally different like alternative health, I would love to have you on. Just let me know. Go to morgantalks.com, click on contact. And there are people who do this, so there's really no need for you to be afraid if you're saying, oh, well, I've never been on a radio show. I don't know what to do. That's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to intimidate my guests or scare them or even really challenge them. This is a forum for them to talk about whatever they wish. morgantalks.com. Make sure to click on contact and select be a guest. Well, we're back with Bill Bean, the Reverend, the spiritual warrior. I love how you call yourself a spiritual warrior, Bill, because that's really what you are. It sums it up so well and so nicely.
And you know who created that title?
It wasn't you?
No.
Who?
Tom Danheiser from Coast to Coast Radio is the one that said,
Stop.
You are the spiritual warrior.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
We were just talking a little bit about Coast during the break. I'll let all of the listeners know. We were just a little bit, and I guess maybe you'll be on in a few weeks or a few months, perhaps. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that. Wow. Yeah.
And that happened while I was doing a TV taping with George Norrie and his TV show Beyond Belief. It was out there in Boulder, Colorado, and I was in the studio, and we were in between shoots. We did both shows in the same day, and we were in between shows. And Tommy D came up to me and he said, you know, you are the spiritual warrior. You're the spiritual warrior, Bill Bean. That's it. It just stuck after that.
So what were you before? Just Reverend Bill Bean?
No, just Bill Bean.
Oh, okay.
You know, and he came up and said that. It absolutely was perfect because that's who I am. And it's not, again, that I brag or boast or anything like that. It's I am who God has made me to be. And God works through me in that way to be that spiritual warrior. So that's how I can claim that title, by the power of God.
We were talking about, well, way before the intermission, way before the break, we were talking about how you returned home from visiting your father in Florida, the year's 1979, and you're trying to figure out how to get God back into your life, Mr. Spiritual Warrior. So what happened?
Well, at that point in time, you know, and this was returning home from the Florida trip where I had that most important conversation with my Uncle Clifford about faith and how we can take power and authority over these things by the mighty power of God. Yahweh is his name, listed 6,823 times in the Bible, replaced with the title of Lord. So wherever you see Lord in caps, that should say Yahweh. Jesus' Hebrew name is Yeshua, which means Yahweh saves. Just thought I'd add that in. But anyway,
Sure.
I returned from this trip, after he's telling me that I could take power and authority over this stuff by the power of God in Jesus' name. Little did I know that on that very day of returning, I would be engaging in the first battle. At this point, I've been a victim all these years, from 5 years old to the age of 13, being victimized over and over again. Family members being victimized as well, especially my mother. So returning home on that day, my mother and Richard, the new man in her life, and my grandmother,
Yep.
Dora Harvey, they were all present, and they were waiting on my Aunt Joyce and her boyfriend to come over at that time. And what had taken place was this was around the July 4th time frame, 1979. And over that period, our dog had gone missing. We had a little 10-pound poodle, little black poodle.
Just ran away?
No.
Oh.
The dog had never run away. We had a 4-foot fence surrounding the yard, so there was no way that dog could get out. But on this particular night, Richard had taken my mother and my aunt to see fireworks in downtown Baltimore. And my aunt left her dog, which was a much larger dog, a Keeshond, had the look of a husky, in the yard with our dog, and the dogs got along fine. They played together always. And so they returned to find the Keeshond in a fetal position, looking traumatized, and no sign of our dog at all. So my mother and Richard look around the neighborhood late into the night, early morning hours. They're exhausted now. No sign of the dog. They come back. They decide that they're going to try and possibly get some sleep for a couple hours before resuming their search, after the sun comes up. And that morning, Richard woke up first, and he was awakened to a horrific sight of this, apparently what they thought to be the dog's hair, just gobs and hunks of black dog hair sprinkled all over them, all over the bed, trail of it leading from the bed into the hallway, up the hallway, in the kitchen sink, in the bathroom sink, and just a horrific sight. And the dog was never seen again.
No, really? Oh, my God.
Yeah. And so also during that same time frame, there was a painting that had been on the wall for many, many years without incident. It was a painting of my sister when she was a little girl. I'd say she was probably, 3 years old. So it was a painting of an innocent-looking 3-year-old child in a dress, and it was on the wall for years. There were no problems, and then all of a sudden, after the incident with the dog hair and the dog being missing, my mother discovered the painting had been altered. And the painting was altered in such a way that if you looked at it, Morgan, and you would have had to have seen it for yourself to truly understand what I'm saying right now.
Yeah.
The painting looked like it was looking back at you. It looked like it had come to life, and it had sinister-looking eyes.
So you're saying that the painting itself had changed?
Oh, yes, it was altered.
As if it had been repainted?
Not repainted, but just like it had come to life, like something had literally brought the thing to life. It changed this was an innocent little girl, a painting of an innocent, beautiful little girl.
So this painting just, it had another layer to it, like another meaning to it, perhaps?
Oh, well, evil, absolutely evil. The eyes looked evil. The mouth was downturned like an evil snarl. And so, of course, my mother took it off the wall. But on on this day, here we return, and my mother's told us, what has happened. She didn't go into detail about the hunks of dog hair Richard did at a later time.
Uh-huh.
But she's describing, telling us what happened, the dog's gone and all this. And then my aunt and her boyfriend are coming over. They want to see this painting. My mother had taken it off the wall, and she put it back in the bedroom in the closet. So they arrive. My mother goes down to retrieve the painting, and then all of a sudden, an invisible force picks her up from the back of her neck and hurls her through the air across the room. She crashed into her makeup table, and she was cut open. She was scratched. She was bruised. She was laying in a heap. We all picked her up, and I became, for the first time in my life, because I was a scared little boy from age 5 to
your whole childhood.
13. Yes, and then on this day, I became enraged. And also, Morgan, what I failed to tell you is that during this time period, and for the last 16 months that we had lived there, we had a Catholic priest involved. And my family and I are not Catholic, but my step-grandfather was. And he went to his church, and they sent a priest out. So he was involved with us for the last 16 months that we lived there.
Oh,
And so the activity actually grew more violent and more intense, I guess because of his involvement. No reflection on him. I really appreciated both he and the church, getting involved and trying to help. But it grew. It had gotten even worse. But on this day, I was not a scared little boy anymore, and I was enraged.
You wanted to conquer this.
Yeah. I grabbed the Bible. I grabbed a jar of the holy water. It got to the point where the priest was bringing mason jars full of holy water to us, and I grabbed a mason jar full of holy water and a Bible. Here's where I made my mistake. Now, when we're engaging these demonic forces in spiritual warfare, we should be binding them and casting them out by the mighty power of Yahweh in Jesus' name. That's what we should be doing.
Okay.
But
yep.
I was new to this. My uncles tell me that we could take power and authority. Well, I really didn't do that. Where my mistake is I was commanding them to show themselves. So instead of binding and rebuking and casting out, I'm commanding and demanding that they show themselves. And all of a sudden, the house is like a scene from a horror film.
Sure, because they're showing up now.
Exactly right.
You summoned them.
And that's exactly what happened. Doors were opening and slamming. Things were falling off the wall. They were terrified. There were 5 adults. I'm 13, and there were 5 adults with me.
To think you're 13 doing all of this.
I was just at a breaking point. And so they're following me up the hallway, and at one point I'm still commanding them to show themselves, and the adults are standing behind me in the dining room and several feet in front of me, and the adults were several feet behind me. 4 entities did appear. We all saw them. They appeared for several seconds. They appeared in like greenish, yellowish beams of light. One entity, and this is one that was seen many times and attacked many family members, including myself, had the look, we call it the Undertaker. It had this, it was chalky white skin, black hair, black beard, wore a black suit, very sinister-looking individual, black eyes. The second entity had red hair, like a very close crop, curly red hair, long scar down the left side of its face, black eyes, chalky white skin, another entity that was regularly attacking my mother. Another entity was a female, had the look of a witch, long black gown, sharp facial features, long dark hair, and then the 4th entity is what I call the dark force entity. It was this black hooded entity with glowing red eyes. And so these entities appeared for several seconds clearly, and then they just dissipated. They didn't just suddenly vanish. And as they appeared, literally all hell was breaking loose in this house. And as they departed, which they just dissipated, they did not just suddenly vanish, they dissipated. And as they were dissipating, all the chaotic activity that was taking place suddenly ceased. And then we left there and ended up going over to Richard's house for the night. and then coming back. And it wasn't long after that we would be leaving there, and we were forced to leave. We couldn't continue any longer. And furthermore, Morgan, all of us came under periods of demonic oppression at various times while living there. Even my own mother, who was just so beaten down mentally, spiritually, and physically. We all were, but she suffered more than us. And just the level of attacks that she sustained for really up until the time of her untimely death.
I'll say she was suffering, my God.
Yeah, she surely was. And so after we left the house in 1980, we left most of the belongings there and moved in with her boyfriend Richard, and wasn't long after that she again passed from this cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 44, and this was 2 months and 2 days after my grandmother Dora Harvey had passed from a sudden series of heart attacks at the age of 64. And I was devastated. I was absolutely devastated. So to make a very long story shorter, I had no desire to live for a long time, and it wasn't until I had an epiphany one day that maybe there was hope, maybe that I could do better and be better. I had to quit school in the 8th grade, Morgan. I quit. I lied about my age. I went to work for a construction company. I was paying room and board to live somewhere at this young age.
So what, about 14 years old,
yeah,
13, 14? Oh, my God.
Very quickly, and I grew up with the worst of the worst people on the streets. I did drugs, I drank, I was violent, you name it.
So the demons pretty much, they took over you as well.
Pretty much, and it was, and I understand this now again, because the devil knew that God had a plan for my life, and he knew that God was going to work through me in a great way to help people. So he was trying to snuff that out. And so this is why I was in so many life-threatening situations. Literally, the devil was trying to kill me before I could get to this point of where I'm at right now and helping people, God working through me to help people. But make no mistake, the devil wanted me out of here. He wanted me off of this earth. And each and every time something life-threatening came up, God was there to save me each and every time throughout my life. I can never thank God and praise God enough for that. But, one day I did have that epiphany that, maybe I can do better and be better. And that's when I decided to make God first in my life. And I mean, this was authentic. I know a lot of people, when we do things, if it's something bad, we say, oh, God, if you'll just get me out of this, I'll never do this again, and I'll be close to you and all this kind of stuff. And then people kind of peel back and revert back to their ways. That's human nature. But I meant it. I really, truly meant it, that I wanted God to guide my life. I wanted Jesus in my life. I wanted to try and do the best that I could do and be the best that I could be and have a hope and a future and faith. And as I was doing this and calling on God and asking him to literally come into my life, and I'll give it all to him if he can help me to move forward, and he did. It was a gradual process. It was not an overnight process, Morgan. This is because we all become conditioned. We are all mind conditioned to living and doing certain things, living a certain way, and having certain habits. It is very hard to break out of these things, especially if you are living in the fear-based, trauma-based way of thinking and living every day. So that requires tremendous faith and a tremendous dedication to God to literally just picture yourself on a diving board, and you're about to dive into ice-cold water, and you don't want to do it because it's uncomfortable and it's unknown, and that's how it was. And then when I finally was in that level of sincerity and commitment, and I did it, then my life started to change. And I noticed that the closer that I came to God and the better that I tried to be each and every day, God would bring more and more blessings into my life. And so once the transformation took place, just amazing. My life is 50 times more blessed than it's ever been cursed. And now God works through me to help people. become free from evil. So it's the
It's
greatest
just beautiful
thing in the
to
world.
hear this story, how you went from being a victim to being a survivor.
Yeah.
And a helper. It's not just that you survived, it's you're using your life lesson, which went on for decades.
Yes.
And you're growing still, even, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
And now you're sharing that with other people. Bill Bean, we're up against a break, but when we come back, I do want to touch on a few things, including how everybody is just freaking out about coronavirus, the negative energy. What can we do about it? I'll ask you about that on the other side of the break. Again, for our listeners, could you remind them how they can connect with you online, please?
And I want to thank everybody out there for listening in.
Yes, thank you all.
Morgan, for having me. And if
Anytime.
you need me, or you want to get copies of my books, or you want to, you need help with a deliverance or whatever, BillBean.net. Just contact me, www.billbean.net, and I will do everything I can to help you.
And I personally have to reach out to Maura Geist. She is a spiritual medium. She's been on before with me. She's coming on April 13th with me. That's a Monday. I've got to thank her because this is an awesome guest, and Maura is really the one that's responsible for kind of helping me get this interview together. So, got to thank her.
You're listening to The Morgan Cunningham Show.
Morgan Cunningham's Less Hype, More Talk program.
For the last hour and a half now, we have been talking with the Reverend Bill Bean, spiritual warrior. We've been learning a lot about his story as a kid and how he went through life trying to become the spiritual warrior that he is today and to perfect his relationship with God and get closer to God every single day, every second of the day. And now I want to get into some of the meat and potatoes. So, for example, somebody contacts you, Bill. What do they tell you? And how do you listen to them? I mean, do they email you? Do they call you? What happens once they make that connection with you, Bill?
Yeah, I receive emails every day. Morgan, I'm up. If I'm not traveling, then I'm home. And I'm home and up until 4, sometimes 5 a.m. every morning answering messages from people from all over the world.
So when do you sleep?
I try to get at least 5 hours, but there are times that now, thank God, if I get to bed at 5, then sometimes I'll be able to sleep till 11 or till noon. You know, if I have to do that, I'll do it. You know, I try to get as much rest as I can, but sometimes it's difficult. There are times that I don't get any sleep even the night before. So if I've got to leave on an early morning flight, say 5:30, 6 a.m., chances are, if I get 2 hours of sleep, that's a lot, and sometimes no sleep, because it's very difficult. I have a preparation process before I go on these trips, and then my body is not conditioned to lay down at an early hour and try and go to sleep, so I end up laying there awake the whole time and looking at the clock and just waiting to depart. So by the time I get to the hotel room after everything is over with in the course of that day when performing an exorcism or curse breaking or whatever it may be, I'm totally exhausted, and then I always hope that I can get good sleep that night in a hotel room before I return home. But it is quite a journey, and let me tell you right now, there is no way that I could do this of my own accord. This is by the power of God working through me. There is no way that I could keep this kind of schedule up. There is no way that I could deal with all these different people. I can't even have my cell phone on. My ringer is off because so many people call me and text me during the course of a day.
I bet.
I'm always returning messages. And so it would be a full-time job in itself just to be on the phone and take all the calls and the text.
You were telling me something during the last break, and I find this absolutely wild that you were working a case in France, but you don't speak French, and they don't speak English.
Yeah, I'll never, ever forget that. And that was it's all a true testament of the power of God. I didn't come on your show to preach a sermon, but I'm talking truth. I'm talking reality. This is not phony televangelism. This is the God's honest truth, and this is how God works through me to help people. And again, I can never thank him and praise him enough for that. But yeah, that family, I'll never forget it. They couldn't speak English, and I could not speak French yet. By invoking the power of God, and through the power of God, God worked through me to deliver that family from some horrific demonic experiences that they were having. And the only way that I knew precisely what was going on is that they had sent an email, and I had someone interpret it for me. And so that's how I was able to know.
Gotcha. So you had a translator.
Yeah.
And it's just a beautiful thing. You're listening to, your story in English. We're talking mostly about America, but this has spread over to other countries where you're working, and it's kind of this universal language. What you're speaking is what you're saying, because it's not just unique to America. This is happening everywhere, according to you, and You're saying that you're able to help people no matter where they are.
Yeah, and it's by the power of God. So it's not that I'm any special one. It's just the power of God working through me. And
you're just kind of the conduit.
Yes, exactly right. And places like Pakistan and Brazil and Peru, just places that even in Africa, places that you just shake your head and go, wow, and all through Europe and Scandinavia and just many from Canada and just the UK, just incredible the different countries that people from those countries that have contacted me for help, and that God has worked through me to have actually helped those people.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Let's see. And some of these cases, I jotted this down in my notes because it absolutely amazes me. You don't always have to be there in person. You've done some cases via Skype.
Correct. That's absolutely right.
How the hell does that work?
Well, it's the next best thing to be in there. So again, even though I'm not physically standing there, I am physically there spiritually, and my presence is there by being able to see me and, most importantly, hear me. So when I am invoking the power of God, even like right now, I have done on-air deliverances for radio hosts and other people during the course of radio programs.
Just over the phone or over Skype?
Over the phone. And so I've done them over the phone and Skype as well. But
wow.
It is by the power of God working through me and my voice. So when we, right now, if someone were having a problem right now, I would stop talking about what we're talking about and take action by the power of God and go into warrior mode and bind and rebuke and cast that garbage out. So this is, even though, of course, it's better to be physically standing there and present, but the next best thing to being there is Skype, and then even the telephone, even the cell phone. As long as we're invoking the power of God, and God is working through us in that way, then it doesn't matter if we're there or not. We are still invoking the power of God over the demonic situation, the demons involved, and binding and rebuking and casting out. I recall one time in Ireland, this was another one via Skype, and this young man's become a good friend of mine, Enda Coyne, and his wonderful wife now. They were Edna was having some serious demonic problems. He contacted me for help, and not only was I able, by the power of God, to deliver him from everything via Skype, he has gone on now, and before he went on to, he felt he had a priestly calling as well, and so he's gone on to become a minister. And before that, I actually baptized him via Skype with his then fiance assisting. So I needed her to, he got into the tub, And I can't tell you, Morgan, how many times I've baptized people in their own bathtubs, hundreds of times.
In their bathtubs?
In their own bathtubs.
And you do this regularly?
Yes.
Wow.
And so it doesn't matter if you're in an ocean, a creek, a stream, or a bathtub,
as
pool.
long as there's water.
I've baptized people in all of them, any body of water that you could think of. So this took place after his deliverance, and I baptized him, and he has gone on to become a minister. He's a very knowledgeable man, and he lives over in Ireland, and a great guy. And another dear friend of mine that's like a brother, Kev Baker, has a show, and he's over in Scotland. And God has worked through me to perform deliverances over him and his brother. Just absolutely amazing. I could go on and on and on. There's no end and no limit to the power of God and how he works. And as long as we are willing to be that vessel, and if we have an authentic connection with him, then there's nothing that we can't do, because it's his power that works through us to do great things.
Bill, how can it be that coronavirus is spreading throughout the world, and yet God supposedly loves us all and he's here with us all? What can God do about this coronavirus that is really freaking people out throughout the world? How can he help us? What can we do for God to get this help? I just don't know. I don't understand. What can we do? I mean, there's nothing left to do.
What we can do is pray. And so again, I could not do what I do. And Morgan, believe me, I haven't even touched on the worst situations that I've been in as a spiritual warrior and an exorcist. I've been in life-threatening situations, physical confrontations, people handing me guns because they wanted to shoot me and try to stab me and things of this nature. This is all by the power of God that I can do what I do, because it requires faith. And it's the same thing with this here. This is something that we can't control physically. However, I do have ideas, and maybe I'll share in a second after I say what I'm about to say. This is a spiritual matter in that we must take this to God. So I've started having these prayer services over the last several weeks where we're doing this online, and tomorrow I'm going to have another one at 7 p.m. Eastern on YouTube Live. And all are welcome, and we get together, and we sometimes people will ask me to pray for a certain person, and if you've looked at my Facebook pages, I do that all the time. People have prayer requests for me, and I post them endlessly. And so we will pray for each other, but we are also going to, and have been, praying against this coronavirus. Now, what I'm about to say, I can't prove, but I'm going to speculate here because I really feel that it's a possibility.
Let it out.
I feel that this thing is a created thing, and it was let out of the laboratory over there in Wuhan. This didn't happen from somebody eating a bat or whatever. I don't believe that for 1 second. I think that this is something that is man-made. It has been unleashed. It is affecting the world. Furthermore, God is allowing this to happen because we now, as a society, especially in America, a lot of people turned away from God, and they're into themselves. And it's all about me, me, me.
Selfish.
It's very selfish. Not everybody's that way, but more and more people, especially our younger people, are turning that way. And the devil's loving every second of this, because Jesus, Yeshua, the Melchizedek, the high priest for God, the Son of God, the Messiah, he was selfless. So he always put himself last. He put others first. And so he taught us that we should be that way. Well, the devil, he's like the rebel son of God, the rebel older brother of Yeshua, and he is selfish. And he doesn't care if you worship him. He wants you to worship yourself, because if you worship yourself, then you're not worshiping God. And that's what his mission is to sever the connection between God and man. And that's what's taking place here. So if you read the Bible all throughout the Old Testament many times, the people rebel against God. They go their own way. They're self-centered. They self-worship, or they worship other idols. God gives them every chance to come back, and then he destroys them. life is like a wheel, and this wheel continues to roll round and round, and history does repeat itself. And I feel that we have clicked into another part of history on this wheel that is going to repeat itself unless we as a people, and I'm talking about the human race on planet Earth, repent and come back to God, and then he will cool his anger and spare his wrath against us. If we do not do this, I truly believe that we could be in the beginning stages of the last days on this earth, life as it is, because there are things taking place now simultaneously, not just this coronavirus. There's many other things that are happening as well. I mean, like never before.
Coronavirus is probably top at the list, but there are things that are close behind it right now.
Yes. So we have something else that we have to really be mindful of. There is a real effort now, and I wonder, although I can't prove any of what I've just said, I often wonder if this is a precursor that is leading us somewhere. So you have this Elon Musk, who's got all these companies. You know, we know he's got the Falcon X and the Tesla, and he's also got a company called Neuralink, okay? What this guy's trying to do, and he's already got the chips made, they want people to take these chips, and it will connect them with the computer system, and they'll become superhuman. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to urge everyone not to take these chips if it does come to this point in time. Look at how people stood in line for the iPhones when they first came out. Remember that, Morgan?
They're already programmed to stand in line and wait for these chips. They're waiting for iPhones.
Correct.
And now they're just going to be sheep and follow whatever they're told. Oh, this is the next, latest, greatest thing. You've got to have it. And next thing you know, you see all the people waiting down the street to get into the store.
Or what if the narrative is, we have to take these now because of these super viruses that will affect human beings to the point to where they can't be human beings anymore. So if you take these chips, you will become superhuman, you will become part machine, and you will not be affected by these types of things. You'll
become immune, sure.
Correct. People are going to line up in the millions to take it, and I'm telling you right now, if people do this, I firmly believe it's the mark of the beast, and if they take it, they're cut off from God, they're severed from God, and then they are going to face horrible, horrible things. And I don't wish that on anybody. I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm speaking what I believe to be the truth, and people really need to wake up and see the world and the things that are going on in this world for what they really are. Do not be a follower any longer. I am so thankful to God. Even though I was victimized so much in my childhood, I was born a leader, and I never followed the crowd, and I will never follow the crowd. I'll either lead the crowd or I will go my own way, but I will never follow the crowd. And it is very important for people to understand that the only way that we can have true discernment of what's taking place is by having a strong connection with God. And I call this warrior mode, which is walking in faith, strength, and courage. I don't have any fear of anything, and I stated that earlier in the interview, and it's true.
Yeah, it
is. We have to, if we can really have this authentic relationship with God, then he will give us a knowing of things, and he will guide us in the right way. Otherwise, the world is full of sheep right now. I call them sheeple, and it's unfortunate, and they will follow along with anyone or anything, and it is just a sad sight to see.
It is sad. It is scary. So let me sum this all up for you, Reverend Bill Bean, the spiritual warrior. We're down to about 2.5 minutes left. Basically, you're saying that if people let God be in their life, they will be leaders with God, and therefore we'll be able to collectively surpass and perhaps get past is a better word, get past the whole coronavirus fear that's going along right now, the whole narrative about coronavirus.
Yes, Morgan, I absolutely believe that.
And it starts with prayer?
Yes. So everything should start with God and end with God. When I open my eyes every single day of my life, I thank God and praise God for the day. So for people who say, God doesn't work miracles, God doesn't answer prayers, yes, he does. He works the miracle of life for us every day when we open our eyes. We're not promised tomorrow, so we need to make the most of each and every day.
And as long as we believe in a higher being, our immune system will be better because now we believe that we're part of something.
Correct. And I'll close with this. I know we're getting, close to the time, and I want to thank you again. I really enjoyed being on with you, and I hope to be on with you again. And
absolutely.
Blessings tomorrow for making this connection. We as human beings, actually all life, operates on frequency and vibration. So if we are on high frequency, high vibration, life is good, life is positive, we're moving forward. But if we're on low, life is horrible. And so the devil knows this, so he tries to keep everyone on low frequency, low vibration. And like you mentioned about the fears of the coronavirus and these other things, that is keeping people on low. It's low frequency, low vibration, and the devil wants us right there. We can't move forward if we're on low, and he knows it, and that's why he uses those tactics.
And you, the spiritual warrior, are telling us that the solution is not to follow that path at all, which seems to be where a lot of people are in this country right now and around the world. We have to follow God, is what you're saying, in order to get out of the whole problem with coronavirus.
Absolutely correct. The coronavirus and every other situation, God makes the impossible possible. So to those, and it starts with the devil and his minions and the human minions on this earth that's doing the devil's bidding, they know who they are, and more importantly, God knows who they are. And they are going to have an appointment with God one day, and he's going to set his face against them, and I wouldn't want to be them for 1 second.
They won't like it at all, will they?
No, they will not, Morgan.
Bill Bean, we're done. Sorry, we're out of time. I could talk with you another 3 hours, but I'll have you back on in the future. It's been a pleasure.
Fantastic. My pleasure, brother. God bless you and your family, and God bless everybody out there who's been listening in.
Right back at you, Bill Bean, the spiritual warrior. Find all of his information at morgantalks.com. Well, we're out of time, folks. Good night.
Morgan Cunningham's Less Hype, More Talk program is off the